Hello and welcome to this special edition of Suits and Boots, the TDI podcast series, in conjunction with the Innovation Forum. In this series, speakers at this year's inaugural Critical Minerals Innovation Forum event discuss some of the key themes that will be covered at the conference. I'm Ashton Stewart Carter, Executive Chair at TDI, and your host for today's podcast. This episode is all about transition finance, and we unpack what transition finance means in practice, moving beyond mere labels to the hard levers of industrial decarbonisation. The discussion dives into financing pathways for steel and mining, electrified and biofuel haul fleets, trolley-assist, renewable purchase power agreements, and designing new projects for net zero from day one, not retrofitting later. We explore how credible ESG performance links directly to investor confidence and permitting, while showing what good looks like on site can reset perceptions of modern mining, and where circularity and recycling may scale next. The talent challenge also takes center stage, how automation and AI change the skills map and why early hands-on experience still matters. Finally, we connect geopolitics and tariffs to risk, valuations, and cost of capital, arguing for pragmatic, fundamentals-led finance of real, needed, hard assets. I'm delighted today to be joined by Catriona Bell, a leading voice at the intersection of mining, sustainability, and transition finance. Catriona is currently the Director of Metals and Mining Transition Finance at Standard Chartered Bank, where she focuses on sustainable investment and funding for critical minerals, a topic that's becoming increasingly vital as the world accelerates towards net zero. Her career path is as fascinating as it is diverse. She began as a geologist, exploring and modeling ore deposits before moving into private equity, investing in early and mid-stage exploration projects. She later joined Rio Tinto, where she served as principal advisor for energy and climate change in the copper group, chief of staff for CEO, and worked in the ventures team on battery metals, mergers and acquisitions. Beyond her corporate career, Catriona has also been a champion for the next generation of mining professionals. She co-founded Young Mining Professionals UK and helped build the Young Mining Professionals Global Network, creating a platform for young leaders to connect and grow within the industry. It is a pleasure to have Catriona with us today to unpack the evolving role of finance in the energy transition, explore how capital can drive responsible mining, and discuss what it will take to deliver a just and sustainable transition for the metals and minerals that underpin it. Welcome, Catriona.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So I've just introduced very briefly your career. It sounds like a really interesting career, fun, in fact. You seem to have covered many different parts of the economy, from private equity to corporate strategy and now transition finance. Tell us a little bit about how you got here and why you got here. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
I think it all started back in my childhood, really. I grew up in Cornwall, and that was a great place to be exposed to mining history. I was running around the coastline with all the old engine houses, and I just had a very strong exposure during my childhood to the impact of mining, the history of it in terms of how Cornwall developed. And as I went through my school years, my aptitude in science really forced me into thinking about that for university. And I decided that actually going down one single avenue in science would be not as interesting. And I discovered that earth science and geology actually brought together all the sciences and applied them to the real world. And that was most interesting to me. So I ended up going to study geology at university. And when you're in geology, then typically in the time that I did it was sort of three career paths. One was academia, the second was oil and gas, and the third was mining. And at the time, I didn't quite fancy going to live in an offshore rig and log mud for 2 years, which was the typical graduate role for a geologist in oil and gas. And mining, you could stay on land, and also the rocks would be a bit more interesting to look at. Interestingly, I kind of had a interest in the finance sphere as well, both through A-levels in economics and maths, and so wanted to get exposure to that. So during my university career, I had one experience, which was working as an underground exploration geologist in Manitoba in Canada, in an underground nickel mine. And the second one was sitting on the Golden General Fund at BlackRock. So two absolutely completely different experiences, but they gave me a sense of the full value chain of mining and who funds it, and also how does it start at the very beginning. So that's how I ended up going into mining. And the mentor I had at BlackRock, who is currently the Chief Development Officer of BHP, she said, take advantage of having a technical background and go and get your boots dirty. I went then to Australia and became an exploration geologist out there for two to 3 years, came back, did resource geology, and then had this feeling like, well, I wonder what the mining finance roles look like now. I've got a good body of technical experience. I did a conversion sort of course at Imperial in metals and energy finance, and then worked my way into private equity through Rio and into Standard Chartered Bank as in a transition finance role. So again, mining was prompted by my interest in the rocks, and that still is what grounds me today. And then the commercial aspects are kind of how we tangibly apply that real world sort of application, and the importance of mining in the economy is kind of what sparked that.
Well, I think that resonates very strongly with me on a couple of things. One thing is Cornwall. It's not just surfers and beach bums, but you've got the Eden Project and that great history of mining down there. And I absolutely, that resonates so strongly with me. And I spent quite a lot of time in the early days of Eden Project and the Post-Mining Alliance and developing that. And I agree, must have been a great backdrop. And your very kind of diverse background, I think, is a great advertisement for the mining, getting a career in mining and the minerals value chain. It is multidisciplinary. You can grow into many different areas, exercise your different skills. So that's tremendous to hear. And we'll hear a little bit more about perhaps women in mining as well. But tell us a little bit about your job now at Standard Chartered, transition finance. I think I know what that means, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit what it means for you and what it means for Standard Chartered.
Yeah, it's a great question. Transition finance, when I came into the bank, it was a small team of industry, like a bit of an industry task team, right? So bringing together individuals to help facilitate the bank's ambition of net zero financed emissions. And what that meant from a metals and mining nexus was the lending into the steel industry, and how the steel industry can decarbonize. So instead of just putting it on our clients that the industry had to decarbonize, we said, okay, how can we help them do that? And by getting industry experts in, they can, provide the insight and the support of the decarbonization, both the technical solutions as well as enabling the financing of those. So that's what we really look to do within transition finance within the bank, but more broadly than just steel. I mean, we have experts from carbon capture and storage, alternative fuels, the battery value chain, all coming together to understand the best solution for our clients in terms of their decarbonisation journey. So very much focused on an industrial decarbonisation. Whilst there is broader lending to the business, the transition finance team itself focuses on supporting our M&A product group as well as our project finance product group with industry insight and deep connectivity within those spheres. I think it seems, unfortunately, a bit of a buzzword and people aren't quite sure where it sits. And I think that's a shame because it is not something that is just a tag. It's actually a real committed effort to assisting the world's decarbonisation through the lever of providing finance. In terms of how it differs from traditional project finance, if the project itself will go some way to reduce the carbon emissions of that industry or that particular operation, that can be transition finance. Additionally, when you consider applied to the metals and mining sphere, if a mine is mining a transition metal, for instance, copper or something that goes into the battery value chain, we also consider that transition finance.
So transition finance then is you'll choose your projects or your transactions because of the intent. There's got to be something there about decarbonisation. That's one description. You could also say that it could be a project which has a mineral that is going to contribute to decarbonisation because it can be used in electrification downstream. How about the modalities? This is all project finance, or can this be corporate finance as well?
Corporate finance of a company that sole objective is to be providing decarbonisation solutions. So let's say it's a technology company that is solving a problem within steel, or it's a carbon capture and storage manufacturer or something like that. So that is what we consider also transition finance. So any corporate lending into that space would be.
Excellent. I've some of my background's in finance, and I seeded a private equity fund in mining. And one of the difficulties I found there, this is going back, a decade, was actually kind of raising capital because the attitude towards mining was not very welcoming, and let's put it that way, partly because it was seen to be a very specialist thing, and partly because there's alternatives to mining which make more money, and also around the kind of ESG things. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see the attitude is changing now that I think it's fair to say people realize that minerals are going to be important for coming into a more decarbonized economy. And I guess what I was picking up on what you were saying beforehand is it fair to say that for Standard Chartered you need an access point which is around transition finance? So you're saying we're not going to mining directly, but we're going into it in order to decarbonize. Was that sort of a justification? And does that tell us anything about the changing attitudes towards mining from the finance and investment community?
I think the answer is, across all the aspects of financing, there is a strong ESG performance expectation. So transition finance is one element of our lending, and absolutely any other lending is covered by a very detailed framework that is strongly held to. I think the broader question is how are the investor attitudes changing towards mining with the energy transition race for critical minerals. I think there's an interesting dynamic here because there's a sense of urgency around developing these mines now. And a lot of that has been caused by shifts in political rhetoric and the need for resilience outside of a strong reliance on China from a processing perspective, and how we as an industry kind of consider ESG metrics there, given some of the countries are, let's say, politicizing that term. I think mining in general has always been focused on ensuring and evolving and better ESG standards.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, if I'm hearing this correctly, is that investors and financiers look at and expect that ESG standards, sustainability standards, are continuously improved, and that's a good metric for understanding whether this is a responsible mine or not. I guess what I'm asking is, does that give investors more comfort that mining is an investment that they can have on their books?
I've mentioned about the tension between getting the mines developed quickly and the ESG credentials. I think there's always going to be a very strong understanding that mining can be a solution to many of these sort of broader environmental issues with the race to net zero and the criticality of these metals as they go into the battery value chain. So there's a necessity, but there's also a need to do it responsibly. And typically the narrative has been quite negative on mining, as you well know, given your background and issue. And
do you think that investors and financiers believe that there is such a thing now as responsible mining?
Yeah, there absolutely is responsible mining. There is exceptional examples of responsible mining out there, and there's a lot of there's a long way to go in a lot of areas. So I think, yes, well, you're absolutely right about the attitudes and the backdrop and the evolution of that. And I think, prompted by the heightened scrutiny and also visibility of minerals and mining in the media, it's become more of a topic of conversation. I think, I've always been a mining advocate, having been on well-run sites where I know the lengths and work that goes into trying to reduce a footprint as much as possible by being a good, responsible actor, by engaging with communities. But I'm also cognizant that isn't necessarily the experience of every mining operation globally and throughout history. So obviously, there have been poor actors in the past. So I think what's important about how we communicate mining is that recognition that we've come from not so great operations to definitely some of the highest technologies and the involvement of communities. It's a constantly evolving space. There's much more, the consolidated mining framework initiative that is taking place has just enabled the industry to collaborate on how mining is done responsibly. Investor perception is clearly coloured, but is evolving towards as the need for these minerals and the communication from the industry outwards in terms of what good looks like. But unfortunately, we are for every one negative, you need 7 positives to sort of outweigh. So we're quite much on the back foot when it comes to this. But I think our challenge is how we bring it to the forefront of people's minds, like what good looks like and how that is being implemented. Because in some ways, it's a kind of out of sight, out of mind reality, in that people day to day, whilst they use their minerals, they don't see the mines, they don't see good mines. They often see poor performance that has been brought up, and that is obviously something that we have to recognise and deal with. Ultimately, permitting and a lot of the mines have been held up in permitting because there's a lack of trust and a lack of, and that's being caused by the narrative of mining being not as strong. So I think it does stem from showing what good looks like to the investors, to the communities, so that the permitting process is easier, and therefore the investor community have confidence that what they're investing in will be brought to production and be done in a responsible way.
Yeah, you're so right. As humans, we're kind of wired to look at the negative side of things. The whole of the risk industry picks up on adverse news. That's what we seem to enjoy, the negativity bias. So I think it's great that you're there to be the ambassador to convey what the reality is on the ground. And one thing I picked up on there was back in the day, I worked with Walmart, the big US store, and I did a fully traceable gold supply chain. And to convince the Walmart executives that it was okay to have a fully traceable gold supply chain up to a mine, I had to leave their program, which was called Eat What You Cook, which means that they always have to go and experience what they're selling to their customers. So we did exactly that. We put 10 Walmart executives onto their executive plane, flew them to Nevada, took them around the Carlin Trend and looked at some mines around there, and so they could actually understand what it is, because visualizing that, seeing what it is, and go, oh, that's what a mine is. That's not what it looks like on Google. So I think you're absolutely right. Part of your background, I think, must be very useful in Standard Chartered, is you have a technical background, and you were part of or led the Copper Group's energy and climate change effort at Rio Tinto. Could you give us an idea of some of the steps that you took there, or mining companies can actually take to decarbonize? It seems such a big job. So what are the practical things that you ask and potentially finance?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for the Copper Group, it was very much a scope 1 and 2 of their emissions. When it came to scope 1, it was around the mining trucks. So how do you solve for diesel run haul trucks, and there are a number of technical solutions that are being explored there, including the likes of trolley-assist or electric haul trucks, but also using biofuels, which I think they've gone on to implement. The other, of course, is procuring renewable energies insofar as one can from the grid, so negotiating renewable energy private PPAs. The other areas are considering how you can leverage carbon credits. So obviously that's a sort of stepwise solution, but that's something that you can make a sort of nearer term impact, positive impact, whilst the technical solution comes to fruition on the mine site. So those were some of the things that the corporate group explored. But it is an absolute effort, and given not only do you have to have the technical solution, you have to be able to allocate capital in the most efficient way across their portfolios. So how does that compete with sort of ongoing business as usual capital? And then, of course, when you are putting sort of retrofitting mines, you've got to consider how you're developing new mines. So when you're looking at your project portfolio, you've got to consider designing those for net zero rather than doing it a traditional way. And so it's all sort of in the planning process when you're thinking about the width of the haul roads, for instance. Are they sufficient to employ trolley assist or any innovative technology? So yeah, there was a number of different levers we looked at, Paul, and obviously when it comes to the financing aspect of those, it's trying to articulate what the value proposition is. So not only were we considering decarbonized solutions and net zero solutions, but what was the financial benefit to doing so? Because ultimately it has to be sustainable. So any way that there was a positive economic return, that obviously is one that can be financed.
The biggest contributor to CO2 from mining, I think, is comminution, so the reducing the size of the ore, crushing essentially, and that
absolutely, yeah.
And that obviously needs to have connection to the grid or very considerable power generation from elsewhere. Is that something also that Standard Chartered would finance underneath the transition financing? So the auxiliary and ancillary industries that allow the transition to happen at a mine?
It's something that sort of kind of falls squarely within a transition finance framework. It's not something that we've had opportunity sort of brought to us or we've explored at the moment, but it's definitely would be interested in thinking through what projects exist in that regard. And yeah.
And I bring it up because another conversation we're having is around decommissioning and closure and how that could potentially in some places be an opportunity for planting renewable energy installations.
100%, yes. Yeah.
A topic maybe for the conference. Changing subjects a little bit is a part of your background is that you co-founded Young Mining Professionals in the UK and you helped build YMP, Young Mining Professionals globally. Thinking about talent and, as long as I've been doing this, the search for talent and to attract talent in the mining industry has always been a tough one. But things are now changing because there's great automation and you can plant these facilities near to urban centers. Tell us a little bit about your personal view, I guess, on how to get people like you into the industry and whether that's something that the bank looks at as well when you're doing your due diligence on a mine.
So this is a perennial problem, and I'm pretty sure throughout my 15-year career so far, every year in the conference there's a panel on talent crisis and the wave of retirements that are expecting and the leakage of qualified engineers. So how does one look to solve for that? I think by founding Young Mining Professionals in the UK, that was very much about trying to find fellow peers and create a platform for them to both identify career opportunities, but also as a sort of collective, be a bit of an advocacy group, sort of looking externally and going into schools and trying to promote the industry. But I think this is also very localized, and sort of different jurisdictions are facing different issues. I think in the sort of developed West, when you consider the Europe and the USA and Canada, this is a problem. It hasn't been the most attractive of careers. There's limited number of schools sort of producing those technical skills, and so there's the gap sort of in the West. But I would say the opportunity to source really strong talent from the likes of Latin America and India. There is a lot of people who are definitely interested in working in mining, just in those jurisdictions. I think that has to do with the prominence of mining within those countries. I guess the career opportunities that are visible. So from a UK perspective, there's virtually no mining here, and it is evolving, yes, but you'll probably have to go abroad to get a job. But then you also have the cyclicality of the industry. So you're in it, but what happens if the industry, the commodity cycle turns and there's all of a sudden limited jobs? So you definitely have to have a sort of either be exposed to it when you're young, like I was, or have fallen into it by accident, as many people who I talk to have done. So how do we make it more attractive? I think you mentioned very well that the kind of skill set is changing, right? So you can have remote automated mines that you're running from a city. It's very high tech. I'm sure the use of AI will proliferate throughout the industry very in relatively short order, given its potential. So trying to harness those technical skills that are not purely mining technical skills, I think will provide a great diversity and opportunity for the young people to be interested in mining. The other aspect of this is, of course, that there's a lot of tech and software, etc., is intangible, and there seems to be a bit of momentum to focus on hard assets and what is real. And if AI is going to take over the software, the intangible, how do you position yourselves for the hard assets? And I think that we could sort of capture those eyes that are turning and try and provide the industry that kind of looks to solve for those tangible things and create, of course, or the bedrock of all that comes on and is developed from mining's products.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and I think we're going to see how this plays out. But my big worry is to have effective people like you in different parts of the value chain. In mining, you have to have your early career actually going out to mine, looking at a rock, understanding what that rock is. If those early stage opportunities aren't there because they're replaced somewhat by AI, then you're not going to have the critical thinking, that intuitive sense of what works when you take a different role later in your career. So I've got a feeling that youth employment is going to be something that we all need to look at, not just in mining, but across many different sectors. Another topic, and this could be a short answer to a question, is around circularity. So you could say that the transition is obviously about kind of mining, but also there's all that stuff which happens after mining, and there's end-of-life products, and there's remining, and there's recycle economy, and so on. What part do you see that playing generally in finance, and in particular, is that something which Standard Chartered looks at as well? Some of those downstream, if you want, post-mining, post-consumer opportunities.
Currently, it is a relatively immature space, and recycling tends to be quite fragmented and localized. And I think there's a big opportunity in terms of what consolidation might do, and maybe technologies that are going to be more agile in terms of being localized to the source of scrap or of recycling feedstock. And then the circular economy itself is definitely an area that Standard Chartered is absolutely looking to support. and we've got clients exploring solutions in this space. And we see it as absolutely a key emerging sector in metals and mining, right? So the products that use primary origin minerals will eventually have an end of life. And I think there's also a strong push for manufacturers to develop products that have recycling within their sort of DNA, as in how they're constructed, to make that an easier process. So I think when the whole value chain can work in sync, then the financing opportunity becomes larger, and that there'll be more appetite for that.
Yeah, no, that's a big hurrah for me. One of our clients that we work with is Fairphone, and very early on developed a modular phone, so you can break it into 7 or 8 different parts, essentially with, the end in mind. I think that's exactly the way to go. One more topic before we before we wrap up, rather. So we're talking at the moment where it's very difficult to take your eyes away from the rolling news coming in around tariffs and international trade and responses to tariffs and so on. What does all this mean for financiers and investors? How do you navigate all this?
I think it's a pretty tricky one, where markets move on tweets rather than on sort of traditional fundamentals that one's been used to looking at. And I think navigating it all it does, it increases the risk profile. So when we're looking at the impact in the near term on commodity markets, it's obvious. The swings in the copper price, and of course rare earths, back and forth on that. So when you are investing in these mines, so what is the long-term price you're looking for, and how can we, how do we back solve for that? And is this a structural change, or is this a whim? So there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and that unfortunately sort of breeds a bit of paralysis as people kind of trying to understand and what the read through of all of it is. To be able to predict, I think, is not necessarily a fool's game, but it's something you just have to sort of navigate around and think about what are the pragmatic assumptions, and go back to the supply demand fundamentals, and sort of hope that will be what transpires, because ultimately you'll have to, with higher risk, financing becomes more expensive, and then that in turn creates a higher need for higher grade in the mine, or a better return, and ultimately that will kind of stifle investment. So I think there will be what will transpire as a certain amount of pragmatism here that should hopefully unlock financing going forward.
Yeah, in some ways, so all this movement on geopolitics and tariffs is going to affect the NPV and valuations, as that sort of risk is factored in. And so it's even more important to focus on the fundamentals. And as you were saying earlier, on the hard assets part of this, have you actually got something on the ground that somebody wants, and can it be moved?
Yeah,
that's tremendous. Look, I'd love to just wrap up with a little word game. This is very good fun, Catriona, so you're going to enjoy this. And there's no right answer. So the game is I'll just read out a word or a phrase, and you just respond with whatever comes to mind in a single word or a sentence.
Got it.
Okay, here's the first one. Mine of the future.
Sustainable.
Okay, very good. Perfect answer. Here's the second phrase. Just transition.
Fair,
as in there's equitable, no one left behind. And you can answer
equitable.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the final one to end on, and you can expand this into a sentence. It doesn't have to be a one-word response.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was sticking to one word.
No, I think that's very efficient. China.
Ooh. China has a lot of what the West requires in terms of engineering and processing capabilities. So pragmatic engagement with them is prudent.
Interesting. Very good circumspect answer. I was wondering whether you're going to say they have a lot of finance, and so they might be competing, but you didn't. So
I
we'll
did.
so we'll close it there. And really, thank you so much, Catriona. That was very interesting. Really interesting to hear about your career. I do think that you are a poster for people who want to come into the mining minerals value chain and carve a career out of there. And it's we're very lucky to have you on the podcast. And we'll see you at the Innovation Forum.
Great. I really look forward to it. Thanks again for the chat. It's been fabulous. Thank you.
Sadly, that brings our podcast to an end for today. It leaves it to me just to thank our speaker for joining us and spending time with us. Please check out the rest of the special series of Critical Minerals Innovation Forum podcast on the TDI Suits and Boots podcast channel. I hope to see you at this year's event, where the conversation on the practical realities of a just transition will be continued, and you can hear more on today's topic from Catriona. Thanks for listening.